Every morning, you wake up. Maybe the first thing you do is check your phone, instinctively reaching for it before your eyes are even fully open.
Right, it's just this automatic motion.
Then you drag yourself to the bathroom.
Yeah.
You brush your teeth with the exact same movements. You start the coffee machine without thinking.
And you grab your keys to take the same, perhaps slightly traffic-laden route to work. It's a beautifully familiar sequence.
It really is. But stop right there and ask yourself, are those choices you are actively making, requiring real concentration?
Or are they just highly efficient automatic neurological scripts playing out?
That is the core question. And for most of what we do, big and small, the answer is, well, it's unsettlingly close to the latter. We operate on autopilot far more than we realize.
And if you want a true shortcut to understanding human nature, why a sales executive clicks send on a reckless email, or why a social movement ignites overnight, you have to look past the conscious decisions.
You have to dive deep.
You have to dive into the science of habits.
And that is exactly our mission today.
Yeah.
We are taking a deep dive into the neurological blueprint of human action, pulling from some groundbreaking research that reveals why we do what we do. The goal here is to give you a functional model for understanding and, maybe changing these deeply ingrained patterns.
To do that, we have to start right at the core mechanism. Researchers found this 3-step neurological loop that just governs the whole process. It's so simple, and once you see it, you start seeing it absolutely everywhere.
It is, of course, the foundational concept, the habit loop,
The famous loop.
identified through studying everything from temptation to rats and mazes. It's what converts a whole sequence of actions into an unconscious, efficient routine. What are those 3 steps again?
So it begins with the cue. That's the trigger, the scent, the time of day, an emotional state that kicks the whole thing off.
Then the routine.
Then comes the routine, which is the actual behavior you do, physical or mental. And finally, the reward. That's the payoff that gives you the immediate gratification.
And it tells your brain, this worked, let's do this again.
Do it again next time. And the brain's whole motivation for this is just efficiency. The brain is, you could say it's lazy, but it's really just optimally efficient.
It's trying to conserve mental effort through a process they call chunking, right?
Exactly. Chunking is this neurological miracle that lets us take a long sequence of actions, like, say, backing your car out of a driveway and merging onto a highway, and bundles that whole thing into a single automatic routine.
So you don't have to think about every single step.
Imagine if you did, you'd be mentally exhausted by noon. Habit is just the brain's way of taking the effort out of life.
So let's go deep into the basement of the brain, literally, to the most ancient, primitive structures that handle these things. We are talking about the basal ganglia.
The basal ganglia is absolutely central here. It's not where your memories are. It's not where you do conscious thought. It's this small, ancient structure deep in the brain, and it's basically the filing cabinet for all of our habits.
It runs the scripts.
It runs the scripts. And the foundational research on how this all works, how you go from conscious action to, chunked automation, a lot of it comes back to those iconic experiments.
The rats in the T-shaped mazes.
With a piece of chocolate at the end, yes. So those experiments were done with brain probes in the rats, so researchers could monitor their brain activity in real time.
And at first, the rat's brain is just firing on all cylinders.
Oh, furiously. The first time in the maze, it's processing everything. Sniffing, exploring, bumping into walls, trying to decide left or right. It's a lot of work.
So the cognitive effort is super high during the whole routine.
Precisely. But after a week of repetition, run straight, turn left, get the chocolate, the neurological activity changed completely. That's the birth of a habit.
So what happened?
The basal ganglia took over, and the activity in the rest of the rat's brain just plummeted. It basically went quiet. It only spiked at 2 points.
At the beginning and the end, the cue and the reward.
That's it. The first spike was the click of the partition opening, the cue. The second spike was when it found and ate the chocolate, the reward.
And in between, during the routine.
The brain just settled down. It was running on autopilot, conserving its mental reserves.
Which really proves that this ancient structure is designed to offload our daily routines. Conserving mental effort is the brain's #1 goal.
And this incredible separation, storing habits completely separate from conscious memory, is maybe best illustrated by the tragic but scientifically profound case of Eugene P.
EP's story is so important because it proved that memory and habit live in totally different neurological zip codes.
He had this rare viral encephalitis, and it just left these walnut-sized chunks of damage in his brain. It wiped out his ability to form new memories, just like the famous patient HM.
So he couldn't remember his own grandkids.
Couldn't remember what he ate 10 minutes ago. If you asked him where the kitchen was in his own house, he couldn't draw you a map.
A profound amnesiac. But, and this is the paradox, his ability to form new habits was completely fine.
It just defied everything doctors thought they knew. His wife, Beverly, was warned never to let him go outside alone.
Because he'd get lost instantly.
That was the assumption. But he would often slip out the door, and Beverly, frantic, would look for him, only to find him back home 15 minutes later.
Holding a pine cone or something with no idea how he got it.
Exactly. He had no conscious memory of the route, couldn't describe it, couldn't draw it, but his body knew. It was the basal ganglia running an old script, triggered by subtle cues in his environment.
So researchers tested this, right?
Oh, rigorously. They placed 16 objects in front of him and, through repetition, trained him to choose specific, correct objects. He never remembered the training or the researchers.
But he chose the right objects every time.
Every single time. The habit was forming completely outside of his conscious awareness.
But here's the critical proof point. They changed the test. Instead of the routine, they just put all 16 objects out at once and asked him to pick the correct ones.
And he was completely lost. The objects meant nothing to him outside the context of the routine. He'd even say something like, "That's just a habit, I think."
But the conscious knowledge of why was just gone.
Gone forever. And this also explained that strange behavior of him cooking multiple breakfasts.
Ah, right. Because the cues.
The morning light, the radio turning on, the smell of coffee. Those would trigger the routine, even if his conscious memory, "I just ate," wasn't there to stop the script from running.
It's a fascinating and, as you said, tragic insight. The key takeaway for us is just, it's a bit unsettling. Habits are encoded deep in our brains, and they never really disappear.
They're just waiting for the right cue and the right reward to pop back up. This is why breaking a bad habit is so much harder than just replacing the routine. The old memory is always there, just lurking.
Okay, so understanding the loop cue, routine, reward, that's one thing. But now we have to talk about what actually drives it, what keeps it spinning, often against our better judgment.
Right, and it's not the reward itself, it's the anticipation of the reward.
That neurological spike of powerful wanting.
That is the craving. The true engine of the habit loop is not the getting, it's the wanting. Craving is what turns a simple sequence into an irresistible compulsion.
And this was brilliantly mapped out in the lab, wasn't it? In those experiments by Wolfram Schultz with Julio the monkey.
Julio was a very lucky monkey. In the first phase, he learned to pull a lever when a light came on, and he'd get a burst of delicious blackberry juice. The reward.
And the brain probe showed exactly what you'd expect. A big dopamine spike the moment the juice arrived.
The brain was signaling, "Hooray, I got a reward, this is great."
But as the behavior became a habit, something incredible happened.
The pattern shifted completely. The reward spike, when the juice arrived, it disappeared. Instead, the dopamine spike moved backward in time.
To when?
To the moment Julio saw the visual cue on the screen, the signal that told him the juice was coming.
So the neurological pattern shifted from, I got a reward, to,
I'm gonna get a reward.
and that feeling, that rush of dopamine, that's the craving.
That's the craving. It's the brain screaming, "Do the routine now, the payoff is coming." And if the juice didn't follow the cue, the monkey would get angry. The dopamine would just crash. It wasn't missing the juice so much as the cravings payoff.
That's a huge distinction. The habit is maintained by the craving, not just the reward. And that insight is so powerful when you look at, successful commerce.
Take Cinnabon, the absolute master of sensory marketing. Why do they put their stores slightly away from the main food court?
It's the smell.
It is the smell. That powerful, sweet scent is the cue, engineered to waft down the hallway and hit you when you're not even thinking about pastries.
So by the time you actually see the store,
it's too late. The habit loop, driven by that subconscious craving, is already spinning out of control. The craving is already a roaring monster. The decision to buy isn't really a choice. It's just the fulfillment of a craving triggered 50 feet ago.
So if craving is the driver, how do you use this to engineer a massive new societal habit? We have to look at the early 20th century in the Pepsodent Empire.
Right. This is where the ad man Claude Hopkins comes in. Before him, toothbrushing just wasn't a daily thing for most Americans. Hopkins took Pepsodent and turned brushing into a national ritual for over half the country by 1930. He didn't invent the product, he invented the habit.
And he followed two basic rules. Find a simple, obvious cue and clearly define the reward.
The cue he chose was pure genius: tooth film. He told people to run their tongue across their teeth, and of course they'd feel that slick coating.
Which is totally harmless, but he framed it as this disgusting thing that needed to be removed immediately.
A clear, simple cue. And the reward was, a beautiful white smile.
But that's the advertised reward. The real reward was something else.
It was something hidden. Researchers found that what people really missed was the cool, tingling, slightly irritated sensation that Pepsodent left behind. It came from chemical additives like mint oil.
Wait, so the thing that made your mouth feel clean wasn't actually the cleaning, it was a mild chemical irritation?
Precisely. If they used a toothpaste without that tingle, their mouths just didn't feel clean, even if they were. Hopkins was selling a specific sensory experience, a chemical buzz, that became neurologically linked with cleanliness.
So people started craving that specific sensation.
Yes, and once they craved that feeling, brushing became automatic. To this day, almost all toothpastes have these additives, sometimes for no reason other than to provide that immediate, palpable reward.
That's incredible. And the same logic applies when you're trying to redirect a habit, like with the initial failure of Febreze.
Oh, a total disaster at first. P&G marketed it as an odor eliminator, targeting the cue of bad smells.
But the key failed. Why?
Because people who live with persistent bad smells, like the famous 9-cat woman the researchers visited, they become desensitized. They just don't notice the odor enough to trigger a regular habit.
So the product just sat in the closet.
Exactly. Sales tanked. So P&G had to figure out a new cue and a different reward. They essentially rebooted the whole product.
And what did they find?
They watched thousands of hours of people cleaning. They realized that what triggered people wasn't a bad smell, but the completion of the cleaning routine. People wanted a psychological signal that they were done.
So they relaunched Febreze not as an odor killer, but as a celebratory finishing touch.
The new billion-dollar formula was cue, finishing the routine, like making the bed. Routine, spritzing Febreze. New reward, that distinct, fresh scent that signals completion.
They even doubled the perfume in it, right?
They did, specifically to provide that immediate, powerful reward. The commercials changed, the tagline changed.
And sales exploded.
Doubled in 2 months, hit $1 billion a year. They didn't fight the existing habit of cleaning. They tapped into it and gave it a better, more satisfying reward.
That brings us directly to the golden rule of habit change. It sounds simple, but it's incredibly hard in practice.
And that is, you cannot truly eradicate a deeply ingrained habit. That loop is in your basal ganglia forever.
So what do you do?
You have to replace the routine. You keep the original cue and the original reward, but you insert a new routine in the middle.
And this is the difference between lasting change and just relapsing. We see this in the story of Lisa Allen.
Lisa was in a really terrible place. Divorce, depression, a decades-long cigarette habit. Her cue was deep emotional despair and stress.
And her old routine was reaching for a cigarette. So much so that she once tried to light a pen.
She needed something radical. So sitting in a taxi in Cairo, she made this monumental commitment. She would trek across the desert within a year.
And that commitment, that goal, it became her new routine.
It did. To survive that expedition, she had to quit smoking and get in shape. So instead of smoking to cope with stress, she substituted it with jogging, planning, and exercise.
And that single new routine became a massive keystone habit.
It radiated outward. Once she started jogging, it forced changes in her eating, her sleeping, her work discipline. She kept the cue, stress, and the reward, feeling better, a sense of control. But she fundamentally changed the routine from a destructive one to a constructive one.
And for listeners with smaller specific kicks, like nail biting, there's an even more targeted path. Habit reversal training.
Right, like the case of Mandy, the chronic nail biter. Her therapist had her first identify the cue, not just anxiety, but the specific physical feeling of tension in her fingertips right before the urge hit.
And the reward was that quick physical stimulation.
So the new routine had to be a competing response. When Mandy felt that tension, she was told to do something that made biting impossible, but still gave her that physical stimulation.
Like gripping a pencil.
Or rubbing her arm, or tapping her knuckles on the desk. She was satisfying the same craving for physical stimulation, the reward, just without the harmful routine of biting. Over time, that new routine became automatic.
And this is so relevant for anyone listening right now. If you're always reaching for snacks at 3:30 p.m., you have to figure out the real craving. Is the reward actually satisfying hunger?
Or is it just a craving for distraction, a break from the afternoon slump? If it's boredom, then replacing the routine of eating with a quick walk or a chat with a coworker gives your brain the same payoff distraction without the calories.
But just substituting the routine isn't always enough, is it? Especially for powerful addictions. Routines can break down under extreme pressure.
That's where we have to look at the incredible success of Alcoholics Anonymous. AA adds a crucial, durable ingredient.
At its core, AA is just a massive machine for changing habit loops, right?
Absolutely. It forces people to identify their cues, stress, places, people, and find new routines, like attending meetings or calling a sponsor that provide a similar reward structure. Community, catharsis, release.
But researchers noticed that even with new routines, people would relapse under high stress. A death in the family, losing a job.
The new routines didn't hold up because AA provides a missing ingredient that goes beyond simple substitution: belief.
Belief.
The sources show that alcoholics who stayed sober through those high-stress events were the ones who cultivated a deep belief, not necessarily in God, but belief that a higher power, or even just the program and the community, had entered their lives.
So belief acts like a neurological shield.
When stress spikes and the basal ganglia defaults to the old drinking routine, that belief system kicks in. And it's almost never cultivated alone. The group setting, the shared experience, that's what makes it work.
Seeing other people like you succeed makes you believe you can too.
It creates the durable belief you need to override the old habits when they're screaming for control.
When we talk about belief in new routines, we inevitably end up talking about willpower. We tend to think of it as this limitless moral strength.
But science suggests it's much more like a muscle. It's a finite resource that gets tired after you use it.
And that analogy, willpower as a muscle, comes straight from that influential Case Western Reserve experiment.
The one with the radishes and cookies. It's one of the most compelling pieces of evidence for this.
Walk us through the setup because it sounds almost cruel.
It is a little cruel. They brought in hungry students and put them in a room with 2 bowls. One had warm, fresh-baked chocolate chip cookies.
The ultimate temptation.
And the other bowl had a pile of radishes. So one group got to eat the cookies, very low willpower needed. The other group was forced to eat the radishes while ignoring the smell of the warm cookies.
The radish eaters had to exert a ton of willpower.
A ton. Then afterward, both groups were given an identical, impossible puzzle and told they could quit whenever they wanted.
And the researchers just measured how long they lasted.
Exactly. And the students who had spent all their willpower eating radishes quit significantly faster. They lasted only about 8 minutes compared to 19 minutes for the cookie eaters.
It's definitive proof. Willpower is a finite resource. If you spend it on one thing, you have less left for the next challenge.
This is why so many successful people don't seem to rely on willpower. They rely on routines. They've automated their self-control.
And this insight is the foundation of high-performance organizations like Starbucks. They knew they couldn't just rely on their employees having some bottomless well of willpower.
Especially under pressure. Starbucks hires a lot of people who might come from chaotic backgrounds, people who don't have that ingrained personal discipline.
Right, but they need that employee to deliver that signature sparkle service even when a customer is screaming at them.
That moment of pressure, that's an inflection point. That's when willpower fails. So Starbucks' solution was to turn self-discipline into an organizational habit.
They gave them a pre-programmed routine.
A routine they practiced over and over called the ALAT method.
Walk us through the steps of ALAT.
So it stands for listen to the customer, acknowledge their complaint, take action to solve it, thank them, and explain why it happened.
So when an angry customer is the cue, a nervous employee doesn't have to think.
They just initiate the latte routine. Listen calmly, acknowledge their frustration, take action, thank them, and explain. By creating this plan ahead of time, it becomes an automatic habit when the stress arrives. It removes the need to spend that finite willpower.
And they also fostered autonomy, which is key.
Absolutely. Studies show willpower is way less taxing when people feel like they have control. Employees who felt respected resisted temptations and stuck to routines much better. Willpower thrives when it feels like a choice.
Now, if we expand from that, we get to the idea of keystone habits. These are small changes that just ripple through an entire organization or a life.
And the best business example here is Paul O'Neill's transformation of Alcoa, the aluminum company. When he took over as CEO, the company was struggling.
Investors expected him to talk about profits and cost cutting.
Instead, he shocked everyone. He focused his entire mandate on one single audacious goal: worker safety, 0 injuries.
Investors freaked out.
They panicked. But O'Neill knew that safety wasn't just a metric. It was a keystone habit that could force the entire organization to rebuild itself from the ground up.
So he implemented a new, really strict habit loop.
The cue was an employee injury. The routine was immediate and automatic. The unit president had to report directly to O'Neill within 24 hours with a detailed plan to prevent it from ever happening again.
And the reward?
Career advancement. You only got promoted if you embraced the system.
The ripple effect of that must have been massive.
It was. To understand why an injury happened, you had to analyze every single manufacturing process, every piece of equipment, every line of communication.
So improving safety forced them to improve quality and efficiency at the same time.
Exactly. If molten aluminum splashed and hurt someone, they didn't just give the worker better gloves, they redesigned the whole pouring system to eliminate the splash.
Which also saved money and improved the product.
And by the time O'Neill retired, Alcoa's income was 5 times larger, and it was one of the safest companies in the world. He used one keystone habit to rewrite the entire culture of a multi-billion-dollar corporation.
So moving beyond the individual and the organization, we see habits shaping entire societies. Organizations themselves are governed by these unwritten habits, these routines that are really just truces between departments.
And when those truces fail, the consequences can be catastrophic. We see this in the tragic examples of the King's Cross fire and that wrong-side surgery at Rhode Island Hospital.
Let's start with the hospital. A surgeon operated on the wrong side of a man's head. The nurse tried to intervene, but the safety routines, the checklists, they just crumbled.
They crumbled because the organizational habit, the truce between doctors and nurses, was completely one-sided. The surgeon, feeling pressed for time, just ignored the nurse who tried to call the mandatory timeout.
So the routine was on paper, but the underlying habit of mutual respect wasn't there.
It was absent. And a similar failure happened during the 1987 King's Cross fire in the London Underground, where a small fire became a disaster that killed 31 people.
Because the organization ran on these rigid habits, the forbearance, these unwritten truces, where everyone stuck to their own little box.
Exactly. The ticketing clerk saw the fire but didn't use an extinguisher because that was the engineering department's job. The safety inspector on site delayed calling the fire brigade because of an unwritten rule against it.
So the habits that were supposed to smooth operations actually prevented any coordinated action.
The small fire flashed over and became a fatal disaster. And the insight here is that only a severe crisis, massive bad publicity, deaths forces organizations to shatter those truces and rewrite their destructive habits.
We could also see the power of social habits in the civil rights movement, especially the Montgomery bus boycott after Rosa Parks' arrest. This wasn't just spontaneous anger, was it?
No, it was a success built on pre-existing social patterns. First, you have strong ties, friendship. Rosa Parks was deeply respected and embedded in her community. Her friends were the first to rally.
And then you have weak ties, or peer pressure.
The news spread through casual acquaintances. Ministers told their congregations everyone was boycotting. When people read in the paper that the whole community was participating, the social obligation kicked in.
You didn't want to be the one person seen riding the bus.
Exactly. The weak ties enforce participation across the whole network. And then later you get the institutionalizing of belief, which is similar to how large churches create new social habits. Small groups, tithing that turn faith into a core part of social life.
And this same mechanism of habit prediction and manipulation is, well, it's used ruthlessly by corporations. Which brings us to Target.
And their data analyst, Andrew Pohl. He became famous for predicting massive life changes based on tiny shifts in shopping habits.
He knew that big life events, like having a baby, make consumers open to new habits. So Target wanted to identify pregnant women before anyone else knew.
And Pohl figured it out. He used shopping data subtle shifts like buying unscented lotions, specific vitamins, scent-free soap to create a pregnancy prediction score.
So they could estimate due dates and flood customers with coupons right when their habits were most flexible.
But they had a huge problem.
Yeah.
They had to do it without being creepy.
Without making it obvious they were spying on you. So they used the familiarity principle.
They camouflaged the predictive ads. They'd send a mailer with baby coupons mixed in among random, unrelated items, coupons for lawnmowers, wine glasses, whatever.
So the new predictive stuff felt familiar and random.
Exactly. And we saw the same principle with Outkast's song, Hey Ya. It was a flop at first. It sounded too unfamiliar, and a third of listeners would immediately change the station.
How'd they fix it?
The DJ started sandwiching it. They'd play the new, unfamiliar song between two massive popular hits.
So you're hearing, hey, alongside songs you already love.
And over time, your brain starts to categorize that new pattern as familiar and enjoyable. The listener's habit loop shifted. Eventually, they started craving the song and became a huge hit. You make the new habit feel like the old one.
All of this science, the immutable basal ganglia, the powerful craving engine, it raises a really profound philosophical and legal question.
It does. If our lives are largely a mass of habits, how much conscious choice do we actually have? Where does personal responsibility begin?
And this tension often gets settled in the courtroom. We can contrast two very different cases to see where society draws the line. First, the case of Brian Thomas, who murdered his wife.
He was acquitted because he committed the crime during a sleep terror. Only the primitive, habit-driven parts of his brain were awake. The courts agreed his actions were involuntary, without conscious choice.
Okay, now contrast that with Angie Bachman, the pathological gambler who lost her inheritance.
Her lawyer argued she was driven by overwhelming neurological cravings, acting without choice just like someone with brain damage, and the casino, Haraz, even called her to offer more credit, knowing she was an addict.
And the neurological data is pretty compelling. Pathological gamblers get this unique, intense dopamine spike after a near miss, which drives them to keep betting.
In that moment, seeing the casino, their neurological state really is similar to someone with brain damage driven purely by the basal ganglia.
Yet the Iowa Supreme Court ruled that Bachman was personally responsible.
They were. They acknowledged the power of the craving, but they assigned responsibility where the opportunity for conscious choice existed.
So what was the key difference that separated her from the acquitted sleepwalker?
The court cited the existence of a voluntary exclusion program. It was a state program that let gamblers proactively ask to be banned from casinos. Bachman had the mental capacity to enroll, but she chose not to.
So society, through the courts, draws the line where there's an opportunity for conscious choice, even if it's the choice to seek help before the cue arrives.
It's a sobering verdict. The science shows the craving is overwhelming, but the law says that we as humans have the capacity for self-awareness and planning. We can choose how to react to the cue.
Which brings us back to the final, most actionable formula for change. Since habits are formulas, we can rewrite them using a technique called implementation intentions.
Which is really just having a pre-written, detailed plan for when the cue strikes. A habit is, when I see CUE, I will do routine in order to get a reward.
So if your 3:30 p.m. cookie craving is really a craving for distraction, you create the plan ahead of time.
When I feel the 3:30 p.m. cue, I will get up, walk to a colleague's desk, and chat the new routine to get a moment of distraction, the reward.
That simple, deliberate act of planning ahead of the cue, that's what provides the conscious control to override the old automatic pattern.
It gives you the blueprint to reclaim your choices one step at a time.
We started this deep dive wondering if our daily lives are choices or just automatic scripts. And we've discovered that those scripts are encoded deep in the basal ganglia, never really disappearing.
Just waiting for a cue and a craving to fire. We've seen how craving drives everything from the pepsodent tingle to the irresistible draw of a Cinnabon.
And we learned that real change relies on the golden rule. Keep the cue and reward, but substitute the routine, whether through sheer commitment or community-driven belief.
We've traveled from the tired willpower muscle of students eating radishes to the organizational discipline of Starbucks' Lady Method. And we saw how one keystone habit at Alcoa led to a massive systemic transformation.
And finally, we explored how habits shape society, from the predictable purchasing patterns Target uses to the powerful social ties that sustain the civil rights movement, while also confronting that difficult line between automatic behavior and personal responsibility.
Habits are these powerful, invisible currents. They're complex, and they often emerge without our permission.
But the underlying neurological formula is remarkably simple and, crucially, always malleable. If we commit to understanding the cues and rewards driving our most frustrating routines, we're given a clear way to plan.
And therefore, a way to reclaim our essential choices. The structure of your day, your productivity, your health. It's all a massive collection of hidden scripts, running just outside of your conscious awareness.
So the ultimate provocative question for you, the listener, is this. Now that you have the blueprint, which of those hidden scripts do you intend to rewrite first?